The sea had a way of polishing secrets in the off-season, smoothing their edges until they appeared harmless to anyone who did not look closely. At Merriwick House, the tide came in and out like a patient listener, pressing salt-slick fingers against shuttered windows and leaving a lace of damp on the stones of the conservatory walls. The estate was not truly abandoned. There were always keepers, always accounts to balance, always the small necessities of a great house. But it was hollow enough that a carriage could arrive without immediately being announced, and a single footstep could carry more meaning than a crowd. Lady Celestine Marr lived within that hollow. She was not born to the sort of ease that made women careless with their days. Even at 24, she had learned that gentility was not an ornament but a discipline. She could be charming without being careless, silent without being foolish, and decisive without raising her voice. Her mother's portrait, veiled in mourning silk, watched her from the drawing room as though the past still demanded punctuality. Celestine had no liking for melodrama. What she possessed instead was an unromantic competence. The tenants along the marsh required instruction. The cook required restraint from her own temper. The servants required guidance that did not sound orders. When her aunt, Lady Octavia Renford, visited from London, Celestine carried out her duties as though the aunt's disapproving eyes were simply another kind of weather. Lady Octavia was not wicked exactly. She was worse than wicked, she was reasonable. She believed in the marriage mart with the calm conviction of a person who could balance a ledger and a conscience in the same palm. It was not enough in Octavia's view that a girl should be respectable. A girl must be useful to someone of rank, ideally to Octavia herself. She must be seen, Octavia had told Celestine only a week before. If she is not seen, she will be forgotten, and if she is forgotten, she will never be placed. I have already spoken to Mrs. Plummer of Hertford Street. A certain connection is, how did she put it, inclined to be generous. Celestine had curtsied. She had not asked what sort of generosity Octavia meant. At the same time that the season drew London's bright eyes toward itself like a candle toward flame, Celestine had remained at Merriwick House, with her aunt's intention hovering over her like seabirds circling a fishing boat. London offered calling cards, morning visits, and the careful theater of being unattached while implying readiness. Merriwick offered quieter commands: repair the flooded well, renegotiate the coal contract, and keep the conservatory from rotting into mold. The conservatory was the chief argument. It held specimens that had once been admired at a distant estate. Roses and tender greens still clung to life in stubborn defiance, surviving the neglect of off-season damp. Celestine had persuaded the gardener to prune them properly, and she had insisted, against Octavia's annoyance, that the glasshouse remain open just long enough each day for light to settle on the fragile leaves. When Octavia complained that such devotion was wasted on no one, Celestine had replied with measured politeness. I do not require an audience to keep what is offered, she had said. Octavia's lips had tightened. You are romantic in your habits. It is a talent that will not translate into advantage. That was precisely what Celestine meant to prove otherwise. Advantage did not always arrive in the form of money or titles. Sometimes it arrived as leverage, information gathered patiently until it could be offered at the right moment, and she possessed information, though she kept it carefully. 3 years earlier, when Celestine's father's debts had forced the family to accept humiliating settlements, an old solicitor had served notice. An entailed estate would shift hands upon a particular death, and the papers were in a private collection sealed behind a wall in London. Celestine had not been present when her father signed anything, but she had been present when the solicitor's clerk, an earnest man with a tree-blink mustache, had glanced at her and murmured that the documents might yet be recovered if someone was patient enough to wait. Celestine had waited. She had learned the language of signatures and the importance of dates written in fine ink. She had spoken to a clerk who now lived under the care of a widow in Chelsea. She had made friends with a banker's assistant who enjoyed being asked to explain sums as though sums were stories. In this manner, she had built an invisible ladder out of details. Her aunt, however, wished for a ladder of different wood, a proposal. This off-season, Merriwick House received a visitor who was neither invited by Octavia nor expected by the household. The Duke arrived on a grey afternoon with the sea wind tugging at his carriage curtains like impatient hands. He was Duke Reginald Hawthorne, and his arrival carried a silence that servants respected but did not understand. There were rumors about him in London, even when there was no season to justify gossip. He had been at war once. Everyone knew that, and he returned with a manner that could not decide whether it belonged to a man who had commanded or a man who had been commanded. He had genuine flaws. His temper simmered beneath courtesy like coals under ash. His judgment was not careless, but it was incomplete. He looked at people as though they might be useful, and when they were not, his disappointment hardened into something like offense. In the drawing room he spoke with ease to his host, yet he listened as though he expected the world to betray him. Celestine encountered him the first time in the conservatory. Because of all places in the world, the conservatory was the least suited to social performance. She had gone there to check the humidity gauges the gardener insisted were unnecessary. She held a small notebook and a pencil stub, and she wore a plain muslin dress under a dark shawl, her hair pinned so carefully that even her absence of ornament seemed an intentional choice. The room smelled of damp soil and crushed leaf. She did not expect a man to enter while she was alone. The Duke stepped through the doorway as though it were a threshold he owned. His coat, tailored and still touched by the wind's chill, bore damp at the cuffs. His eyes moved at once, not to the flowers, not to the glass, but to the person in charge of keeping things alive. "You are in my charge," he said. Celestine looked up, and for the briefest moment she was startled. Then her expression steadied into something polite and precisely controlled. "This estate is not mine to charge," she replied, and her voice did not rise, did not tremble. "I am, at present, responsible for its order during the off-season." The Duke studied her as though he were measuring whether she would resist him. "Order," he repeated, as if testing the word for weakness. "You keep a notebook, you check glass, you prune, but someone has neglected the accounts." Celestine did not blink. "Neglect is a kind of permission. I do not accept it." His expression shifted, not into amusement but into irritation. "You speak as though you were given authority, and you speak as though you were born to withdraw it." It was not defiance exactly. It was the kind of honesty that made some men lean in and others retreat. The Duke's jaw tightened. "I am the Duke of Hawthorne," he said, and it was both introduction and warning. Celestine curtsied with impeccable correctness. "Then you are aware that authority is entailed, not bestowed upon a rival." A pause opened between them. The Duke's gaze lowered to her notebook. "Show me," he demanded. "Show you what?" Celestine asked. "Proof, the ledger, the dates." Celestine considered the conservatory's narrow paths and the panes of glass catching gray light. She could have refused. She could have withdrawn into feminine silence. Instead, she chose agency. "I will show you," she said, and walked toward a table where papers lay stacked, tied ribbon. She did it carefully, making certain her movements looked deliberate, not hurried. The Duke followed. When he reached for the documents, Celestine did not move away. She kept her hands near the stack, not in a possessive gesture but in a practical one. He drew the pages out. His fingers were long and sure, but he handled the paper as though it might cut him. His eyes scanned. His brow drew together. "You repaired the well," he murmured. "I directed the gardener," Celestine corrected. "You settled the coal." "I negotiated," she said, and then she allowed herself a single small glance toward him. "Mr. Dallow did the paperwork. I only ensured he understood what we required." The Duke's gaze sharpened again. "And yet you are not thanked. You assume I require thanks," he exhaled slowly, as though he had expected the world to be simpler than it was. "I have been told," he said, voice low, "that you are merely a companion to Lady Octavia Renford, a pleasant girl to pass the time, nothing more." Celestine paused, her pencil hovering over her notebook. "Who told you that?" "Rumor," he said, and he sounded unimpressed with rumor as a tool. Celestine's restraint tightened into a quiet blade. "Then rumor has been careless." The Duke's eyes met hers fully, and something in his expression warned that he had once been careless himself. He shifted the papers back. "Lady Octavia will not approve of you standing in my way," he said. Celestine's heart did not quicken. It had already learned not to flatter. "You stand in mine," he replied. "If you have come to inspect, you must do it properly or you must leave." He regarded her for a moment longer than politeness required. Then, with a curt nod, he turned toward the door, but he did not leave at once. He walked to the far end of the conservatory where a wall of old books was set into shelving. Celestine had noticed the oddity earlier. One shelf did not sit flush with the others. It looked like it had been moved. The Duke ran his fingers along the edge. Celestine watched him, the way she watched weather. She knew that what was hidden did not remain hidden by accident. "You are not simply keeping plants alive," he said. Celestine did not answer immediately. She understood then that he had not come only to inspect accounts. He had come because someone had written to him, and that someone had used the language of secrecy. "I keep what is necessary," she said at last. The Duke turned to her. "Is there treasure behind that shelf?" Celestine's mouth curved, almost imperceptibly. Treasure is a word people use when they do not understand value. His gaze darkened. "You speak like a woman who knows value." Celestine moved closer, not to threaten but to prevent foolishness. If you pull it away, you will break the shelf, she said. I have broken worse, he replied, and there was a flash of something old in his tone. War, perhaps, or the memory of surviving men who did not. Celestine reached out, stopping his hand with the gentlest touch. Then you will also mend what you break, she said. For a moment, the Duke did not move. Then he looked at her fingers, as though he were only now aware that touch could alter the atmosphere of a room. You are too bold, he said. Celestine withdrew her hand, returning it to her side. I am too practical, she corrected. He stepped back and, in the absence of her guidance, pulled the shelf away with an abruptness that made the glass panes tremble. Behind it there was not treasure, but paper, rolled and wrapped in oilcloth, a sealed packet. Celestine's stomach tightened. The Duke held the packet out to her. This is what you were guarding, he said. No, Celestine answered, and her voice remained calm. This is what someone else stored. And you knew, he said. Celestine considered refusing to take the packet, but refusal would make her look guilty, and she had no intention of offering guilt to a man who already carried the habit of accusation. She accepted the packet. I knew of its existence, she said. I did not know the contents until now. The Duke's eyes narrowed. What does it say? Celestine did not immediately unseal it. The correct action for an honest woman was to unseal it in front of witnesses. If she had any witnesses, this room had only them. The Duke watched her as though he expected her to behave like a liar. Celestine's agency rose in her chest. Open it, she told him. He stiffened. You expect me to handle it. You expected me to show you the accounts, she countered. Now you may expect me to show you this, but do it together, and we will be fair. It was an odd request, one that placed him in a position where blame could not attach cleanly to one person. The Duke, perhaps because he disliked being cornered by logic, complied. He broke the seal. Inside was a set of papers tied with ribbon and a letter, dated years earlier. Celestine's hands did not shake as she read the heading. Her eyes moved over the lines. Something in her expression must have changed, because the Duke leaned closer. What is it? He asked. Celestine took a measured breath. It concerns the entailed estate, she said. It names a successor, and it is not Lady Octavia. Celestine replied. She looked at him directly. It is not the line your solicitors have presumed, it is mine. The Duke's face tightened with skepticism. My father's, Celestine said, and her restraint became sharper. Your solicitor, if he has been speaking to yours, has been misled. I have known there was a packet hidden here because of the clerk's warning. I have not yet been granted the time to retrieve it properly. The Duke stared at her, then at the papers, then back to her as if attempting to fit her into an earlier narrative. I was told, he said slowly, that you were simply an accommodating companion. Celestine's voice softened in a way that did not invite pity. That is what Lady Octavia needed you to believe. The Duke's gaze turned to the doorway as though he might find Octavia lurking there already. Where is she? At the house, Celestine said. She should not be far behind. She insisted on coming today. She said she wished to see your conservatory roses. The Duke exhaled. Roses, he repeated, and the word sounded like an insult. Celestine did not smile. It is easier to discuss roses than inheritance. Before the conversation could deepen, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Lady Octavia appeared at the entrance with a shawl clutched at her throat, as though the wind might steal her dignity. Her expression was composed until she saw the Duke holding the broken seal, and Celestine holding the packet. Then her composure rearranged itself into shock. Celestine, Octavia said sharply, as though scolding could erase reality. Why are you in possession of private papers? Celestine looked at her aunt with quiet disappointment. Because the shelf was hidden behind a moved book, she said. And because I have cared for this house longer than you have admitted. Octavia's eyes flicked toward the Duke. Your Grace, surely understand. The girl does things without asking. The Duke's jaw tightened. I understand very little, he replied, and his temper, showed at last. I begin to believe I have been used. Octavia lifted her chin. No one could use you without your consent, she said, with the crispness of someone accustomed to being believed. Celestine stepped forward. Lady Octavia, she said, and her tone was respectful, but her words held steel. You told London I would be content as a companion. You suggested I would accept being displayed, not being consulted. You. Octavia interrupted with a quickness that suggested rehearsed outrage. Do not accuse me, Celestine. You have no notion what women do to secure a future. The Duke watched them both, silent, and in his silence Celestine felt the pressure of an approaching scandal. The conservatory had glass walls, light carried. Servants would see if anyone walked by. Even in the off-season, a great house had too many angles for discretion. Octavia stepped towards Celestine, seeking to grasp the packet. The Duke's hand moved first. He placed himself between them with the blunt authority of a man used to commanding rooms. Enough, he said. Octavia stopped, her eyes brightening with offended surprise. Your Grace, it is entailed, Celestine said quietly, and her agency made itself useful. It is mine, and if you have misled him, you will answer to him in London, where witnesses exist. Octavia's lips parted. Celestine anticipated it. Octavia would rather charm a crowd than face a direct question in private. The Duke looked at Celestine again. His expression held something new. Yes, but also an aching recognition of his own gullibility. Come, he said to Celestine only. Octavia, furious, turned away toward the main stairs. The Duke left the conservatory with Celestine walking beside him, their steps careful to avoid drawing the servants' eyes. But the Duke's mind was already elsewhere. He guided her into the drawing room, shutting the door behind them. The room was warm with dying embers and the faint scent of sea salt carried in on wool. You knew you were the rightful successor, he said. Celestine set the packet down on a side table. I knew I might be, she corrected. I did not allow myself to assume. Assumptions is how women lose. And now you have it, he said. Celestine met his gaze steadily. Now you must decide what you will do with it. He paced once, not restlessly but as if measuring his choices like a map. I am not accustomed to being corrected by a woman in my own house, he said, and the confession was honest enough to hurt. Celestine did not soften the truth. You were accustomed to being told what was convenient. His eyes narrowed again. My solicitor told me, he began. Your solicitor was given papers by someone who wished to shape your interest, Celestine replied. Perhaps Lady Octavia. Perhaps someone in London who benefits from the wrong successor. The Duke stopped pacing. What do you propose, he asked. Celestine's restraint returned as power. First, you will not speak of this to anyone at Merriwick, she said. Second, you will bring the matter to your London lawyers with my full cooperation, and you will not permit Octavia to control the narrative. Third, she paused, and her voice grew careful, as though each syllable was a step across ice. Third, you will allow me to attend the season to secure the estate and my own position. If you believe I have been a companion, you will see whether I can be anything else. His expression shifted toward something like disbelief. You wish to enter society, he said. I already reside in its shadow, Celestine replied. I would rather stand where the light can reach me. The Duke stared at her long enough that Celestine began to wonder whether her boldness had been a mistake. He turned away suddenly, the emotion on his face hidden by the angle of his shoulders. Lady Octavia will not permit it, he said. I do not ask permission, Celestine answered. His temper rose again. It was one of his flaws. You think me a brute, then? A man who would bully a woman into silence. Celestine's eyes held his without flinching. I think you have been betrayed by men who believe themselves clever. I think you require certainty before you act. And you believe you can provide it, he said. Not quite a question. Celestine's fingers tightened around the edge of the side table. I can, she said, because I have already lived with the consequences. His gaze softened only slightly, and then his voice dropped. Why did you not come to me sooner? Celestine's mouth opened, then closed. The truth was complicated. She did not trust him. She did not trust herself not to hope. She did not trust Octavia's intentions. She also suspected his interest in her had not been entirely honorable. And yet in the conservatory, when he had pushed himself between her and Octavia, she had seen a kind of protection that did not feel like ownership. Celestine chose a middle truth. Because you were arriving as though I were nothing, she said. I would not reward assumptions. The Duke's jaw tightened. You reward nothing, he said, as if admiring and resenting her at once. At that, Celestine turned toward the window where the last afternoon light trembled against the sea beyond. If I am to survive this, she said quietly, I must not be seen as begging. The Duke's steps approached her. He stood too close, not touching, but near enough that the heat of him reached her. Celestine could smell the sea in his coat and something sharper beneath, like tobacco smoke trapped in cloth. You are not begging, he said. No, she agreed. I am negotiating. And when will you negotiate for yourself with the man you intend to marry? He asked. The question startled her into stillness. Celestine turned her head slowly. I do not intend, she said, and stopped. The Duke's eyes met hers. Do not. She could have lied. Instead, she allowed restraint to do its work. She said nothing more, and her silence contained the confession she could not yet offer aloud. For a moment, the room felt too full. Then the Duke reached for the papers on the table. He lifted the folded letter again and scanned it as if reading it might remind him why he had wanted to correct his course. We will take this to London, he said at last. And the scandal, Celestine asked. His mouth tightened. I will ensure there is none, he said, But the certainty in his voice was tempered by the reality of what had already happened. The sealed packet had been exposed between them. Octavia would not let it rest. Celestine looked at him. "You cannot promise what society will choose to invent," she said. "I can promise what I will do," he replied. "And what is that?" she asked. The Duke's gaze held hers as though searching for the point where he could be honest without losing control. "I will propose," he said. Celestine's breath caught. "That would be," she began. "Proper," he finished. "Publicly proper. If you are to claim the estate, you will need a husband who can stand beside you in daylight without embarrassment." Celestine's thoughts scattered. Society would indeed interpret a proposal as a protective gesture, but it would also interpret it as possession. Men offered proposals like purchases. Even benevolence could become a chain. She steadied herself. "And if I refuse?" she asked. The Duke's flaw emerged in the smallest way. His impatience. "Then you will remain at the mercy of those who wish to define you." Celestine's restraint tightened into a firm curtsy. "I do not refuse," she said. The Duke blinked. Celestine's voice remained calm, but she added an important condition. "Not without clarity," she said. "Your proposal may be proper, but it must also be honest." His eyes darkened. "You want honesty now?" he asked. And his irritation softened into something like vulnerability. "You have patience. You have competence. I have been a fool." Celestine did not accept his self-flagellation as tenderness. "You can be a man and still be a fool," she said. "But I will not be made the penance for your guilt." The Duke's expression sharpened. "Then what do you require?" Celestine looked down at the papers. Then back up. "You will speak to your solicitor and correct the error. You insist the rightful claim be heard. You will not allow Octavia to present herself as my guardian of destiny. And you will give me the dignity of choosing the tone of our courtship," she said. "Not yours, mine." He stared at her, then slowly he nodded once. "Very well," he said, "it should have ended there. Instead, fate, like the sea, did not care for their intentions." In the morning following that closed conversation, Lady Octavia engineered a public moment at Merriwick House. She hosted a small, off-season dinner with only a handful of guests, neighbor with too much leisure and enough insecurity to need gossip. Octavia arranged the seats so that Celestine sat where she could be seen speaking politely to the guests while being watched from every angle. She did it with exquisite care, the sort of care that implied Celestine's compliance was expected. Celestine understood the trap. She also understood the only counter available to a woman with restraint. Leave no room for the whisper to attach to her. She said nothing. She curtsied properly. She smiled at the right moment. The Duke arrived late, as though he had been delayed by something unpleasant. His coat was damp at the cuffs again, and his eyes moved around the dining room with quick awareness. When he noticed Celestine's position exactly where Octavia had placed her, his expression hardened. At supper, a guest named Mr. Harrowby made a joke about companion ladies and their ability to keep a house from collapsing. Celestine could have responded. Instead, she turned her gaze toward her plate as though she did not hear. That restraint invited cruelty, it also denied it. The whispers began anyway. "You think she will accept a duke's notice?" Someone murmured across a goblet. "She keeps her head like she expects to be rescued," another replied. Celestine did not glance up. She did not need to. She could feel excess. When the guests rose, Octavia approached Celestine with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Your Grace is a man with impulses," Octavia said softly. "Let us hope his kindness lasts." Celestine met her gaze. "My lady," she replied, quiet and careful. "I do not keep kindness as though it were a clock. It is not yours to demand." Octavia's smile thinned. "You are becoming difficult," she said. Celestine offered nothing in response. After the dinner, the Duke found Celestine in the conservatory again, as though the glasshouse had become their only safe room. The off-season quiet pressed around them, leaving their breaths and the faint creak of wood as the only music. "You were placed," he said. Celestine did not turn her head. She watched the lilies shiver in the faint breeze. "I was managed," she corrected. He stepped closer. "Do you know what I have done?" Celestine turned to face him finally. "I imagine you have corrected your solicitor," she said. He shook his head once. "I have told him to prepare papers in your name," he said. "And I have instructed my men to retrieve the additional documents from London. It is ugly work. It is slow work. I am used to battle, not paperwork." Celestine's expression softened in the smallest way. "You have a genuine flaw," she murmured. "And what is that?" he asked. "That you believe speed equals virtue," she replied. His eyes held hers. "And you believe restraint equals power," he said. Celestine's mouth curved, almost without intention. "It is the only power a woman is allowed without permission," she answered. A silence followed. Then, from down the hall, a servant's voice drifted, small, hurried, urgent. Celestine's attention snapped to the sound. Your Grace, the Duke called out, stepping toward the door. A moment later he returned, his face controlled but his eyes sharp. Octavia has sent calling cards, he said. Celestine's brow lifted. To whom? To every woman of consequence within a coach ride, he said. She has ensured your name is attached to the rumor. She intends to plant you in the marriage mart whether you wish it or not. Celestine's hands curled lightly. It was not fear that rose in her. It was clarity. What did she ask? The Duke hesitated. Celestine's patience thinned but did not break. Tell me, she said. He swallowed. That you have been courted, he said, and the words sounded wrong in his mouth. That a proposal is expected, and you will be available for inspection. Celestine's eyes narrowed. That is cruelty, she said. It is strategy, he corrected. But his voice held resentment. She wishes to control the terms. Celestine took a breath. Her restraint returned as a plan. Then she will not receive the comfort of my refusal, she said. The Duke stared at her. You have not refused, he said. I have delayed. Celestine replied. Now I will make a delay impossible. He looked at her as though she were a storm he could not predict. Celestine stepped closer, and her voice lowered, for the walls still carried. We will be seen together tomorrow, she said. Together? He asked. In public, she continued, and her eyes held his with quiet intensity. At the evening call of a neighbor. We will accept their invitations and appear as though we are already arranged. Octavia will hate it. Society will notice it. You will propose properly, before anyone else can claim the first word. The Duke's flaw, his impatience, fought with his instinct for caution. That would be risky, he said. Celestine's smile turned faint. Everything worth doing is risky, she replied. He studied her. Then, with the reluctant admission of a man who recognized strength when it appeared, he nodded once. Very well, he said. The next evening, a small company assembled in the drawing room of Mrs. Penhurst, whose seaside acquaintance provided just enough reach to summon whispers, without inviting full scandal. The windows were lit with candlelight, and the air smelled of beeswax and rosewater. Celestine arrived with Octavia at her side. Octavia wore a gown of softened satin and pearls that looked as though they belonged to a woman who had never worked for anything. She moved with the ease of someone accustomed to steering conversations. Celestine, Octavia murmured, remember, smile. Allow them to think you grateful. Celestine smiled, but it was the kind of smile that did not reveal gratitude. It revealed composure. The Duke arrived shortly after, and when he entered the room, the air shifted. Men who had been laughing ceased to do so quickly. Women turned their heads with the careful interest of people trained to be polite even when curious. His eyes found Celestine at once. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he approached her as though the distance between them was a nuisance he intended to correct. Octavia's gaze flicked from him to Celestine, measuring what might slip. The Duke reached Celestine's side and offered his arm. Celestine did not take it at first. Octavia's lips parted. The room held its breath. Then Celestine placed her hand lightly on the Duke's forearm, her touch so correct and restrained that no one could claim impropriety. Her agency remained visible even in silence. The whispers began at once. She has accepted. He is serious. And did you see Octavia's face? Celestine ignored the sound. She kept her gaze forward, listening as the women arranged their expressions into polite questions. At the moment Octavia attempted to steer the conversation toward Celestine's supposed availability, the Duke interrupted, quietly, but with a steadiness that commanded respect. Madam, he said to Miss Penhurst, I will request the room's indulgence. It was not a request for permission, it was a signal. Mrs. Penhurst blinked. Of course, Your Grace. The Duke turned toward Celestine, and his expression held something that had not been there earlier in the conservatory. Not charm, not performance, but earnestness struggling against his own pride. He took a small breath. I have been at fault, he said, and the admission made the room go quiet. A Duke speaking plainly was uncommon. A Duke admitting fault was rarer still. Celestine's hands were perfectly still in her lap. I have allowed my understanding to be shaped by others, he continued. Lady Celestine Mar is not what rumor has made her. Octavia's face paled. Celestine did not move. The Duke drew nearer, close enough that only Celestine would feel the warmth of his certainty. She is the rightful successor to the entailed estate papers sus mishandled, he said. And I intend to make this public so that no further manipulation can hide behind whispers. A woman in the corner made a small sound, half suppressed. The Duke's voice steadied. And because I will not ask her to endure society's inventions alone, he said, I ask for her hand. Celestine, will you honor me with your acceptance? Silence struck like a dropped teacup. Celestine's restraint became the only language she trusted. She did not speak at once. She looked at the Duke not for romantic poetry but for truth. His flaws were still there. He was too quick to judge, too slow to admit vulnerability without pride twisting it. Yet his gaze held her like a vow made without spectacle. She curtsied once, deeply. "I accept," she said. The room exhaled all at once, as though it had been holding its breath for permission to believe. Octavia recovered quickly enough to appear graceful, but her eyes looked like a person who had lost control of a chessboard. After the evening's polite congratulation, as calling cards were offered and plans whispered into existence, Celestine stepped away from the drawing room. The Duke followed, and they ended in the conservatory under a night sky that held no stars bright enough to justify dreaming. There, behind glass and greenery, Celestine allowed herself the smallest shift. She removed the gloves she had worn for appearances and tucked them into her reticule. The Duke watched her with a tenderness that surprised him, as if he had not known he was capable of it. "I did not propose because I desired to own you," he said, voice quieter now. Celestine's gaze lifted. "Then why?" she asked. He swallowed. "Because I realized I had mistaken you for what others could use," he replied. "And because I cannot bear the thought of any man deciding your future without your consent." Celestine's eyes softened. "And yet," she said gently, "you did decide our future first, even if your intention was protection." He flinched. The flaw again, his habit of forcing solutions, rose in him. Celestine did not punish him with anger. She punished him with truth. "If you want me to be yours," she added, "you must let me be myself before society demands I become an ornament." The Duke nodded, slow and sincere. "Name your terms," he said. Celestine considered the sea, the glass house, the papers hidden behind a shelf, and the aunt who had tried to bargain away another person's dignity. "My terms," Celestine said, "are simple. We correct the legal error in daylight. We bring witnesses. We attend calls on my schedule, not Octavia's. We announce our engagement with honesty. And we never ever treat a woman's restraint as submission." The Duke's expression warmed with admiration that looked almost like relief. "I can do that," he said. Celestine looked at him, her breath steady. "Then you must also forgive your own impatience," she murmured. He smiled faintly. "Do you forgive me?" he asked. Celestine's restraint softened into something that resembled hope without becoming foolish. "I accept you," she replied. "But I intend to remain difficult." The Duke's smile widened, genuine now. "Good," he said. "Difficulty will keep me honest." Outside, the sea continued its quiet insistence. Inside, the conservatory held their silence like a sacred thing. Later, when spring approached and London began to stitch its season together again, Celestine traveled with the Duke to the city, accompanied by her aunt only as necessary for appearances. She appeared at morning calls with a calling card bearing her future's certainty. She accepted invitations with the calm efficiency she had always used to survive. She did not beg for attention. She took it, one polite conversation at a time. At an assembly where the ton gathered in anxious anticipation of who would be married to whom, Celestine stood beside the Duke during introductions. Society tried to turn her into a story about a hidden girl and a rescued woman. She refused to participate. When asked how she had come by the estate claim, Celestine smiled and offered only what was proper. "By diligence," she said, "and by insisting that truth be handled properly." The Duke, for all his flaws, stood with her. He corrected the legal narrative without spectacle. He demanded witnesses, documents, and clarity. He did not let Octavia's cleverness bury the truth. And when the whispers reached their loudest, Celestine responded with the one weapon society could not confiscate: her calm refusal to play the role offered to her. The engagement progressed through the season with a romance that did not need to be announced, as passionate to be felt. In crowded rooms, the Duke's gaze sought hers when jokes grew sharp. In quiet corridors, Celestine asked questions that made him think before answering. On the day of their wedding, kept intimate and period-appropriate, Celestine curtsied to the officiant with the same controlled grace she had used in the conservatory. The Duke offered his vows with an honesty that finally matched his devotion. Their marriage did not erase his flaws, nor did her restraint become a cage. Instead, it formed a partnership forged in off-season secrecy, challenged in public, and resolved in private reckoning. When they stepped out together toward the awaiting carriage, the sea wind followed them as though it approved of the direction of their lives. Celestine did not look back at Merriwick's shuttered panes. She looked forward, and the Duke, having learned that command was not the same as love, walked at her side with a new kind of humility.